Molamaid Le Bridget in a venenere in a venskachiri Molamaid Le Cheil I. The document that I'm investigating is a translation of this song, of hymn to the goddess or saint or both named Bridget, and this translation was done by my Gaelic teacher Rich Hill in Seattle around 2019. This document is a record of both writing culture and oral culture. Because it is a song, but there is no musical notation, it requires you to either have someone present with you to teach you the tune, or for you to have access to recordings. There are some ways in which this document is a snapshot of the state of Gaelic right now. For example, this teacher I know learned Gaelic many years ago, and at that time there was both the accent grave and the accent aigu in use, but since then Borsna Gaelic has decided that it would only be the accent grave that would be used. In addition, you can see that this document does not have an English translation attached, and that's part of a move back to fluency and a move back to reclaim these languages. I knew that this song was translated from Irish Gaelic, so I set out to search for the original. Because there are so many songs to this figure of Bridget, I knew that it would be kind of hard to find exactly the right one. There are all these different songs with different names and different tunes, so the way I started at this was to find performances and recordings of this song and match the tune that I knew to them. So I set out and I found this great recording by Aoife McNary, and it sounded right. But I ran into a problem just from the beginning. So, as you can see in the title, it says Gavin Molta Bridget, hymn to the Irish goddess Bridget. Okay, great. And then in the description, it says a hymn to Saint Bridget, set alongside a variety of images inspired by the Irish pagan goddess Bridget. Okay, well, that's kind of confusing. But even more so, here I found a recording of exactly the same song by exactly the same artist with much different iconography. Here we have the Saint Bridget, and here the description is I give praise to Saint Bridget, which is not even a correct translation of the title, which is I give praise to Bridget, no saint or goddess mentioned. A beautiful song sung in Irish by Aoife McNary, who gives praise to Saint Bridget of Kildare, one of 3 patron saints of Ireland. And the contradictions didn't stop there. There were many other recordings that I found with many different spellings, many different titles, but the same words and the same tune. This is the oldest version that I have been able to see of this song. It's in the Irish, and you can see that the writing looks very similar to some of the old Irish scribes style, but this is from this book, Untitled Chapter, and this particular piece was published in 1952. There are a couple ways other than just the shape of the letters, that this is a throwback. For example, the lenition here is done with these dots above. Usually nowadays, and at the time in 1952, that lenition is done with an H instead of with a dot. And that was something that happened because it was a lot easier for typesetters to add an H that they already had rather than put a little dot over every letter that had to be lenited. Trying to figure out when this hymn originated has turned out to be pretty difficult. So far, the only version that I've been able to lay my eyes on has been from Untitled Chapter in 1952. There is one citation that I found from the Galway Early Music Festival that said that this particular hymn is from the 15th century. I found several other citations on message boards for musicians all over the internet that say that Tomás O'Flangelly composed it in the early 20th century and composed it specifically to make it sound old. I've also heard people say that Mary McLaughlin wrote it in 2004, and that's demonstrably untrue because we saw the printed version from 1952. Right now, I'm disposed to believe the Galway Early Music Festival because their citation was the best. They had the best explanation for what the hymn was and why it sounds the way it does. But I'll have to dig a little bit deeper. If I had unlimited money and time, I would love to go over to Ireland and get my hands on those manuscripts and go through a bunch of different cathedrals and see what they have available. So how did we get here? According to George Petrie in his complete collection of Irish music, no two versions of an unpublished tune that he found were identical. Part of the reason why these tunes would have been transmitted orally is because after the English conquest and subjugation of Ireland in the 17th century, Catholics were not allowed to be educated. So they were educated in clandestine ways by priests in hedge schools. So the question of whether this song is about the goddess or the Saint Bridget is that question is kind of a moot point. Those are pretty much the same figure. According to anthropologist Donald O'Casey, in his paper, The Cult of Bridget, A Study in Pagan Christian Syncretism in Ireland, the saint was basically a euhemerization of the goddess that was taking the goddess for a saint within the church, and that the ways that people continued to worship Bridget, including visiting wells and visiting holy streams, followed in the pagan tradition. And then lastly, thinking about why this had to be translated from Irish Gaelic into Scottish Gaelic. Why wasn't it already in Scottish Gaelic? According to Michael B. Mannan in his paper, The Same in Origin and in Blood, the ties between Irish and Scottish Gaels were pretty strong for a long time, and for a long time Scottish Gaels thought of Ireland as their homeland, and they kept Irish traditions. And then with the Reformation, and when Scottish Gaels mostly became Protestant, the ties between the two weakened. Thank you for watching this video. Here are my citations. Such fig na cheetah, Counter in Alabama, Count them by this mean.